guys, welcome back to the Epic Dad Legacy Podcast. Appreciate you coming on. I'm really excited for this conversation. We've been trying to book this out for, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 months now. And so we're finally making it happen. I'm excited to bring on Colonel John Fuchko. And so John is the commander of the 122nd Tactical Support Detachment. He's also served as the G2 for the Georgia Army National Guard, the executive officer for the 78th Troop Command, and battalion commander and my commander for the 221st Expeditionary Military Intelligence Battalion. John has also served in the University System of Georgia for over 15 years, and he served on the board of several nonprofits, including the Center for Family Resources and the chair of the National Guard Association of Georgia Finance Committee. So a lot going on. John is a very busy individual. And he does all of this while he has 12 children. Yes, 12. So that's why I brought John on to talk about kind of how he balances time, family time and work and career. And so, John, thank you so much for coming on. Or should I say, Colonel Fuchko, thank you for coming on. What did we chat about today?
Well, we had a great wide-ranging conversation, but I think had some great conversation about that coming together of military service and those values and how that impacts raising children. Few little tips and tricks that work for you and work for me, and then a really great conversation at the end, I think, about humility and sacrifice and just being vulnerable as a dad and what that really means. So it's a great conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John, for coming on. And guys,
thanks,
let's hop into the episode.
Are you ready to become the dad you know you are meant to be? Good, because this is the Epic Dad Legacy Podcast, where imperfect action is better than perfect ideas, promises kept are more important than promises made, and nothing happens unless you make it happen. My name is Drew, father of 3, and founder of the Epic Dad Company. My mission is to help dads up their game and become the husbands, fathers, and men they're called to be. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the episode.
So John, thank you for coming on. First of all, I know you are a busy guy, so I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I think we've had it on the calendar for, I don't know, maybe 2, almost 3 months now. So super excited to have you on.
Yep, man, pleasure to be here. Good to see you, Drew.
Yeah, for sure. So John, would you mind just giving a quick bio on yourself, minute less or so? We'll dive into a lot of different, parts of it. But would love to, have you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of what you have going on.
Yeah. So born and raised in Georgia. Other than military stuff, pretty much lived here my whole life. Been in the National Guard since graduate school. I was getting my MBA, did ROTC, and simultaneously joined the Guard. So I've been in the Guard now, I guess, 21 years. I'm a colonel of military intelligence right now in command. A couple of deployments overseas and lots of great experiences there, commands and otherwise. Also worked for the state of Georgia in different capacities. Right now I'm interim president of the university, but have kind of a higher ed background as well. And then, of course, probably the most important with faith is, of course, being married to my wife, Cherie. We've been married a little over 24 years. We have 12 children, ranging from just turned 23 to 2.5 almost.
Yeah, 12. Yeah, you guys heard that right. 12 kids. So that's why I wanted to have you on, John. So, I mean, wanted to have you on for a couple of different reasons, right? So one, I just wanted to make sure that I had you on record saying that I was the best PL that you've ever had when you're in command. So if you just want to go ahead.
Isn't that what your OER said?
Yeah, right. So John, or Colonel Fuchko, was my battalion commander over at in my battalion for the state of Georgia for a while. I was a PL over there. Just incredible commander. Really great vision for the company. For the battalion. But really wanted to bring you on, John, for that last kind of fact you mentioned. Right, you got 12 children. I feel like I have a tough time balancing my life with 3. So tell me, like, what is the day in the life?
I feel like anytime you move to zone defense, it probably gets hard. But I've also, when people are like, oh, now I feel like I shouldn't be complaining, and I'm like, well, if you go from 1 to 2, I think that's 100% increase.
Yeah.
And I said, when you go from 11 to 12, I don't ever really want to do math in public, but I think that's an 8% increase. So it's their numbers are notoriously unreliable because they don't always convey things the way you want them to. I guess a mathematician would be able to, but each child's different, and you do though get some sense of a system built as you start to move into larger numbers of kids. You get older kids, and they can be helpful with younger kids, and they look out for each other, right? Which is what we would hope siblings would do anyway. Now, I jokingly call it a counterinsurgency campaign, and that the younger ones are the insurgents, and that we're trying to turn the insurgents into counterinsurgents as they get older. So there you go.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, I know, like, so I have 2 girls, 6 and 4, and then we've got a new boy who's 5 months, and so we're kind of in the throes of it, with baby life, and that always makes things challenging for sure. But I think, to your point, like, you get to a certain phase of life with children, it gets a little bit easier, and so, but I'd love to hear too, like with each of my kids, and Murphy, who's my son, is starting to come into his own now, and he's getting his own little personality, but each child is different, right? Like, they have different needs. You want to, not that you parent differently, but you kind of do a little bit in some sense, right? Just based off the needs of the child. So what's been your approach in saying, hey, although, we do have kind of a system, right? You almost have to with that many kids to be, efficient and effective. What's been your approach to say, hey, I want to, make sure I'm giving kind of, a personal touch and making sure that they're getting the things they need on an individual basis from you?
Yeah. Well, I think it's hopefully we do a good job with that. I'm sure we make mistakes, and I think that would probably be a key point is you make mistakes, right? And so I think part of what allows us to be real with each of the kids, and maybe hopefully respond to them where they are, and meet them where they need to be, or take them there, is just a recognition that we're going to screw something up every day, and that's okay. Children have survived, I think, worse parents than we are, and gone on to do great things and be good people and functional people, and people with a heart for the Lord and for where they need to be in life, right? So I think you really have to go into it with a little bit of grace for yourself and a grace for your spouse, to be able to meet them where they are, right? If you're holding on to, we've got to do, we've got to dress them this way, we've got to have 5 different activities that are exactly formulated to their specific interests, which they know so well at the age of 4 or 6 or 8.
Yeah.
They got to get A+ on every single paper they do, because if they fail their kindergarten class, they won't get into the college we want them to go to later. Like, you just can't live that way. And so that's kind of an overlay that I think is important. Within that, though, I would say there's it's probably just think about how you relate to your friends, right? Think about how you relate to people maybe that you work with, right? Or people that you've served with. You treat people like individuals because they are individuals, right? Which means you hopefully take some time to get to know them as individuals, ask questions, know what their interests are, know how they like to do things and how they don't like to do things, know what kind of sets them off, right? And so we do that naturally with adults, right? I don't think most of us say in a workplace setting, for example, hey, my capacity is 3, and after 3, you all kind of blend together, and so we're just going to kind of treat all of you the same, right? Yeah. We wouldn't do that for a minute, right? We'd be, formulating our how we approach people and how we lead them and how we manage them based on recognizing their individual adult human beings. So I think we try to do the same thing with our kids, right? One of the ways I think we do that is we try to give them some agency themselves, particularly as they get older. Be supportive, but help them recognize and build into their life consequences. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But it's just recognizing and taking the time to acknowledge each of them as individuals. And no, there's not going to be each parent with each child is going to go out and have a nights out once a week. By definition, that's mathematically impossible.
Right.
But is also knowing each child doesn't want necessarily that night out once a week, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got one of our kids, Nicholas, who he gets focused in on certain things, right? He's 15. One of the things he's been focused in on really the last 2 years are like home and grounds improvement efforts.
Okay.
Right. That's his thing.
That's nice. That's nice for you.
Well, it is, except it's a pretty constant conversation when you're around him of, I've researched this. I think we ought to be doing this. I think we ought to be doing that. And I'm like, well, Nicholas, I could spend my entire income on your home improvement projects and we'd still be going at it. Right. But there is some stuff there that he likes to do. So it's like, okay, he wanted some sort of tool. Well, let's get him the tool. And then he wants to be able to share, this is what his plans are. This is what he's working on. So you have that conversation with him about that. So that's really meaningful for him. But then Laura, who's the next one down from him, her deal is drawing, right? So what she really wants is not time off with mom or dad, going out to eat somewhere. She wants time in her room to go draw and not to be disturbed with other things, right? And so giving her the tools that she needs so she can draw the way that she wants to became really that way of meeting her where she is. So it's just taking the time to get to know them. But I think the agency piece once again is important in that, because I think sometimes if you're not careful, parents can kind of force kids into what it is they think the kids ought to be interested in, or what they think the kids ought to be doing. And my thought is, if you get to 17 or 18, or whenever it is that you go off to college or you go off to the military or you kind of launch into life, if you haven't learned to make decisions and assess the impact and live with the impact, then you're probably set up for failure, right? And frankly, if you haven't experienced some failure, you probably are truly set up for failure. And so some of the, and it's played out different ways with different kids, but an example of that is car insurance, right? So first off, I don't buy the kids cars, right? So they get older, they want a car, they got to buy a car. Now, lots of reasons for that. One is learning how to buy a car, right? And so, it's not just like, hey, let me throw you out to, whoever's used cars that's going to take advantage of them. But, it's their purchase. So we'll be supportive, but hey, it's your purchase. If you're 18, you're doing it and you need me to co-sign a loan or whatever, then I'll do that. But it's your purchase. You're making the payment. You're doing this. And then insurance, my rule is I will pay while you're under our roof. I will pay $100 towards your car insurance each month. So if you get a reasonable car and you have good grade, student discount, and you don't get in accidents and you don't get in tickets, then that covers most of your insurance.
Yeah, but not if you're driving if you're driving like a crazy person and you get 2 tickets, and hey, that's gonna be their bill they're paying, right?
Yes. Yep. And I'll tell you, with one of our older kids, they had a lot of tickets and accidents, and they got to the point they couldn't afford it, and so they had to make some changes in their lifestyle and so on, because they basically didn't have a car they could drive because they couldn't afford to pay it. And that child has a young adult. I think it was hard, but it was also part of the maturing, right? It's part of what that one child needed to mature in that area. So then others, have done great with it. And one, he actually did get in a small accident, and it really messed up the front of his car. It didn't touch really the back of the truck of the person that he tapped into. And the guy was like, you know what? He's like, I'm fine. Like, you're good, whatever. And so JJ was like, all right, well, he spent several weekends with searching for parts at junkyards and other sort of stuff to get that car back up to operational, and he had to install a new radiator and use some muscle and other tools to get his hood back in a reasonable way. And the car still looks a little bit questionable, but it drives, and he learned some lessons, and also probably learned some new mechanical skills along the way. So they're hard lessons, but I'm of the mindset that home is the best place to learn those. And because you do have an ultimate safety network of, you're not going to starve. You are loved. You're not going to have something happen to you that's just ruins your life. You're going to have that support, but you can have some things that will make it really hard, and you learn how to work through them.
Yeah. And I would say, I love that mindset and kind of that approach. Try to take a similar path with my kids. They're much younger, obviously. So, not major decisions happening right now, but still that they need to know, what's the impact of that decision, if there are any consequences. And really, to your point, I think like having agency to make their own decisions is big. I feel like in society today that's not done enough with fathers. We tend to shelter our kids and feel like our job is to protect them from everything. And then they get out into the real world and it's going to be a different story. Like doing that in a controlled environment, right? Like you said, that, hey, you're not going to starve. Like, I love you. You're going to be safe here, but you are going to have to make your own choices. You are going to have to learn from those decisions is huge. Small caveat on that. So, my kids, my older ones are 6 and 4, right? And they've been talking a whole bunch of smack about beating me in a foot race. Just like, Dad, I'll smoke you in a foot race. No.
Of course.
They're like, I'm gonna smoke you in a foot race. I was like, okay, fine, let's go do it. Like I could have like done like the nice thing, right? Of like, oh, let me, after I'm trying hard and let them win at the end, or whatever. And I was like, what lesson are they gonna learn from that though, right? Like, like no. So we got on the starting line, and my wife said, all right, go. And like, dominated them. I'll have to show you the video of it, but the lesson behind it was, was really twofold. Is like, one, like you're going to have to learn to be okay with failure and like failing, and like I said, it's in a controlled environment, right? Like I still love them. But they need to understand, like, they're not the best at everything. Failure is a part of life. And if you really want to beat Dad in a foot race, that means you're going to have to work really hard. It's not just going to come naturally,
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And then the other one was, of course, don't talk smack unless you can back it up. That's an important one too. So, but no, I feel like we don't do that enough as parents. And, kind of going back to the military too, the philosophy of mission command. I think once I got commissioned and kind of learned that philosophy, I've taken that approach to a lot of things, whether it's in family life, whether it's in the military, of course, or even in my civilian career and leading teams. I want to make sure that, for this example, my kids kind of understand like what the vision is for our family, which is really like, what are our values? What are our principles? And make sure they understand that very clearly, and then let them make their own decisions about that. Right.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And, the challenging piece of that will be as they get older, right? And as our own, kind of going back to the idea around failure, right? So, our own behavior does not always entirely align with our values, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be things, whether it's simple things like, man, I'm not getting up this morning to do some sort of physical activity, right? Or I'm not, we're going to kind of leave the dishes on the table and go take a nap, right? So to larger things. So like, okay, I want to spend money on this nice new truck that I want to be driving around, and I'm not investing money in those long-term things that I say are important, right? And so as your kids get older, they start to notice that.
Yeah.
And they'll call you out on it.
Yeah.
All right. And so that's, but that's kind of a good thing, because it, iron sharpens iron. Right. And so it's one of those things that kind of comes back to like, okay, when they talk about children being a sanctifying experience, that's some of what I think they're talking about. Is not just the challenges of, oh, they're not doing something they should be, and that's really challenging me. It's sometimes when you raise them right, and they're like, yeah, we're going to live a life consistent with values, they're going to push back on you where maybe you started to slip a little bit, right? Yeah. And then like, Dad, how is that consistent with X, Y, and Z? And they might not say it quite like that, but they'll say it.
Yeah,
that's a good thing, right? That's part of that
I think
journey.
That's good for two reasons. Like one, it's going to help keep you accountable, right, to doing what you said you're going to do, and make sure you're living consistent with your values, which is like extremely important for your children to see, right? But then also, nobody is perfect. Like, we're gonna make mistakes, and like, there's gonna be times where like, hey, we're super tired, and we said we're gonna do the dishes and we didn't do it, right? And and like, yeah, we probably should do them, but then it also helps teach your kids the lesson that nobody's perfect, right? Like, even Dad that's trying to live to these values, right? Like, I make mistakes too, and like, that's okay, but yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, little humility teaches us humility, which is, I think, sometimes the hardest, one of the hardest things. Well, particularly if you feel good about your marriage and kids and work and all of those things, relationships with the Lord and with other people. It is easy to be, oh yes, I'm humble. It's actually a lot harder to humble oneself, right? And just to be able to kind of say, I'm sorry, I screwed that up.
Yeah. And
just no excuses, no nothing else. Just, that was a screw up. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. We accept my apology. We forgive me. And you get opportunities to humble yourself many times raising children. So you get practiced at it, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, so John, tell me a little bit about military service and how that has. Well, one, when did you start having children? Were you in the military when you had your first child?
Yeah. So not really.
Well, you said
I'd done my first 2 years of ROTC at Kennesaw State, where I did my undergrad, and so let's see. Yeah. So technically, we had done a little bit of that before our first child, which was born in '99, and then started contracted in ROTC and joined the Guard in 2001. And so it was probably 5 months after our second child was born.
Okay.
JJ. So he's born like January of that year, and I joined in July of 2001. So I would say the marriage and the first two kids precede, swearing the oath, but all the rest of them have been since that time.
Okay. Yeah. Because I'm curious to know, well, one question, have you been intel your entire career? Did you commission as?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'd love to know kind of what values, have you taken away from the military that have been helpful, in kind of leading the family?
Yeah. So, and I would say probably it's important for us as a family, part of our family culture of, we've got family history on both sides, my wife's side and mine. In mine, I know we trace it back to Revolutionary War. My 8th great grandfather, I think, who was
really cool.
a private there. And then every generation of Fuchkos, my great grandfather who came over from the Ukraine in the 1890s. And, he served in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines. He had 2 sons. One of them, my great uncle, he served in World War II. My dad was in the Army. My mom was in the Army.
Okay. Yeah, long line.
Yeah, we've got we've got at least one star general somewhere up in there. We've got some Air Force. My wife's side, they've got Navy and Marine and Army, and I think Air Force too. So I think we got all four branches represented. So there's I think there's so much that I feel like I probably learned from the military. I love how you talk about mission command, and that's certainly that concept of kind of like delegating and so on is huge, particularly honestly in a workplace sort of setting and in leading. But I think there's probably two things that have really resonated with me that I think have played out hopefully in the family and elsewhere. And so, I think it was mission first, people always, right? So the idea that, we really do have to get done. We have to get done, right? There's just things you've got to do. But if your people aren't there with you, if you're not taking care of folks along the way and showing compassion, and not just showing compassion, but having compassion, right? And making yourself suffer a little bit when they're suffering, then I think you lose a lot, right? And so, I've been in situations before where, for example, you're having to lay people off, right? And so, and kind of my philosophy is as best I can, I want to know every one of those people who's being impacted, because it should hurt, right? It should be hard. It should be difficult for me. It should be emotionally difficult for me. And it's a heck of a lot more emotionally difficult for them. But you gotta maintain this kind of in touch with that. And that's one of those things that I think we've tried to teach our kids, is to have that level of compassion and concern, right? And that's played out in interesting ways. We occasionally I'll well, actually, the kids just the older two went with a couple of their friends. They just did a cross country trip. Okay. And they kind of outfitted our van, borrowed it for 2 weeks, and with two of their friends from high school who are twins, and one other friend from University of North Georgia. They got in this van, and they it was classic cross country adventure. Okay. And the stories are starting to roll out now that they feel like we're not going to freak out about any of them. But they had this I think it was right near the Grand Canyon, this interaction with a lady who was just having a difficult time with the person she's in relationship with, who was there, right? And could have been, frankly, a potentially probably dangerous situation. And my kids, JJ and Hannah, with particular help from one of the other friends, they engaged, right? And Hannah was engaging with the young lady. JJ and the other were engaging with the man that was involved in this, de-escalating, yet at the same time, they ultimately ended up having to get law enforcement involved to really kind of protect this person who was probably in a potentially maybe abusive situation. And I was like, on the one hand, I'm kind of like, walk away, but then the other part of me is like, this is kind of how we raised them, right? I told myself, I think when I heard about one of those things up in, I don't know, it was in New York City or something, where somebody, was attacked in broad daylight, and a crowd of 100 people were just watching, kind of standby syndrome. And I'm like, I told myself then, I was a teenager, I'm like, I'm never going to be that person, right? I'm gonna, if I'm going to make a mistake, it's going to be a mistake of engaging, not a mistake of, well, somebody else will take care of this, right? So we've, that's a military thing, right? And taking care of your people, it's a military value. And so I feel like we've kind of raised them with that, and that's been important and a big part of who we are. So that's, I think that's a big component to it, is thinking about people and taking care of people. I think the other one is just that sense of service, right? So it's this idea. We've had two of the older 18 and up. 2 of those have joined, are in the Army National Guard. But it's even those who haven't, sworn an oath they find other ways to serve, and each one in their own way. And some are still, working through issues. Maybe they're more inwardly focused, but with every one of them, there's just a sense of service, of duty, to something greater than yourself. So while with Hannah and Michael, for example, that kind of manifested in a lot of ways, but very specifically in both of them joining the Army. But even with those who haven't, they still have that value. They just express it in a different way, right? And in how they take care of their friends and take care of people that they come across. So those are some of the core values. Those are probably less skills and more values, which I think was the question.
Yeah.
But I think those are some of the ones that, to my mind, are some of the most important.
Yeah, I think to the kind of first value that you talked about, taking care of your people, like you mentioned something as well that's really just about responsibility, right? And taking responsibility, taking ownership, which I think is huge. Like we have a saying in my family, I try to teach my kids is, hey, if you see a piece of trash on the ground, like pick it up. Like doesn't matter if it's your trash, like you need to pick it up. And it just speaks to, like, as they get further and further along in life, like, taking that ownership of, like, I'm ultimately going to be, in control outside of some outside factors, obviously, that can happen, to your life. But but ultimately, like, the decisions that I make are going to help shape what my future is going to look like. And, like, I need to take responsibility. I don't want to wait on somebody else to make that decision. It's like, I want to take that ownership, so that's a huge one that we're trying to instill in our kids even early on.
Yeah. And I think that's that actually reminds me, I won't say the country, I won't be critical of another country, but I will say I was in a foreign country overseas, and I was kind of driving down a street, and I think we had an interpreter with us, somebody local, and I just would drive by some gorgeous houses, right? And then on these nice pristine lots, and then literally, like, the neighbor's yard, if it was even a yard, and it would look like it's like a trash heap. It looks like somebody used it as a dump. And I was like, what's going on there? And they're like, what do you mean what's going on there? I'm like, what? Like, and they were just like, they didn't see any incongruity. It was like, well, that's person's home, and their stuff is good, so they don't care about any of the rest of this. Like, and I'm like, well, first of all, it bothers me that it's that dirty, but it was very much this kind of, there was not a sense of community of we're all going to kind of take care of the community, and I'm sure they did in other ways, and maybe expressed in other means. I mean, I hope so. But it just struck me that the idea of the value that you're inculcating in your kids of, hey, we're all kind of responsible for keeping this clean and so on, like that, just, it seems like that might be a foreign idea in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say it's kind of an Americanized concept for sure, of the ownership, and I've had the opportunity to deploy as well, and haven't really seen that in other areas. And so I don't know if that's an American concept or not, but it's one that, has been important for my life. And, the somewhat of success that I've seen in my career and family life and things like that is really just the ownership of, like, hey, if I, for instance, like in a job, right? Like, if I want to go over here and get this job, there's a couple of options, right? I could just post my resume and see what happens, or I could take the onus on myself and say, okay, I'm going to make this happen. Right. I'm not going to wait on them to look at my resume and say, well, let's see if you're a good fit or not. Like, no, I'm going to look on LinkedIn. I'm going to see who the hiring manager is. I'm going to reach out, I'm going to see, and do everything I can to make that happen. And just kind of, take, like I said, taking the ownership, and just making it happen for yourself, and not really waiting on other people to make the decision,
That's you and you got to recognize you kind of put yourself out there when you do that, right?
Yeah.
Because some people might respond to it the wrong way. You might get rebuffed, you might get rejected, you might get treated rudely, and you kind of have to like, okay, I'm going to take that as a lesson that maybe this isn't the organization I want to be a part of if this is how they're going to respond, right? So, but it can be painful in the process. It can kind of like, wow, that was not what I was expecting, right?
Yeah, no,
and then other times
it's
the exact opposite. One of the things too with that I think is really good about what you said is if you pair that with a good memory, it will impact how you behave when you're a leader, right? So, in the jobs I have now, whether it's in the Army or it's in higher education, generally, I don't have an issue with getting my phone calls returned, right? That's but I now am getting, I get those approaches. The call from somebody who I might not know very well, or I might not know at all, right? But they're putting themselves out there. And so then it's like, okay, wow, maybe that was me 20 years ago, right? Or 15 years ago. Now I need to make sure I'm behaving the way that I ought to be. And the way I tend to think about that is, you don't ever know what type of day somebody's having, right? You really don't. And it could be, that person reaching out to you is having a great day, and they're doing their thing, and you're polite to them. They're like, okay, but maybe whatever. You're not interested. You don't have a need for whatever it is they're talking to you about, and everybody goes on. Other times, though, sometimes people are reaching out to you in a very vulnerable point, right? And they might be reaching out because they've been out of work for X amount of time, and they're about to lose their house, or their family situation has deteriorated, and you can't be a counselor for every person you talk to and talk to them for 2 hours about whatever. But sometimes an engaging, kind word, seeing where somebody really is, offering up maybe a silent prayer for them, whatever it might be, investing 2 or 3 extra minutes can resonate through that person's life, right? That may be the one thing that kind of said, hey, wow, I'm that person just invested something in me. I'm going to, I want to see that as a reflection of my self-worth, which they probably really shouldn't, but, but they do, right? People do. And that sometimes gives them what they need to take those next steps. I'll give you an example. I tell our new students in orientation, I tell them a couple things. One of them is go to class, get involved on campus. But one of the things I tell them is, look, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
I said, there are some of these things you're going to fail. If you don't fail anything in college, you're probably in the wrong classes, or, you've studiously figured out how to avoid any meaningful transformational change, right? Yeah. You're going to fail something. Might be a paper, might be a group project. It's something that's not going to work. I said, no, that's okay. What's not okay is if you stop there, right? Yeah. It's you got to get back up, figure out what I need to do differently, how I need to engage. I said, we can help you with that, but recognize you're going to fail. And so I was talking with a student recently who they failed something, and they got back up and keep moving. And they said, yeah, I told myself, they said, hey, President Fuchko said I could fail. It's okay. Yeah. Right. We can keep moving. And so, sometimes it's those small little interactions with people can just make a huge difference. And when your kids see you do that, or, sometimes your kids will be, waylaid by that person on the side if you're at an event, being like, hey, your dad did X, Y, Z for me, right? That's a powerful message for your child to hear and be like, oh, wow, yeah, this is what he's talking about when talking about these things. Yeah, and it really comes down to the word presence too, right? And actually being present in the conversation that you're in, not thinking about other things, not checking email, just actually being like in the conversation. And I think that's really important too with your kids, just to bring it back to the family life too. And like we as a company, like we have the opportunity to talk to thousands of dads and pulse them about, hey, what's your biggest challenge, right? And
more often than not, it's one, balancing time, and then two, being present with my kids. You know, and it's tough. We've got a lot of external pressures pulling on us, you know, at all times, and you know, totally understand that. And I struggle with it every single day. You know, but just the impact of you being actually present with your children is just humongous, right? And
they know, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't take much time either. It's not like, you know, at least for my kids, and each child is different, but you know, I don't have to sit down and play with them for an hour at a time. It's just, you know, I need to put my phone away and be present and engage in the conversation for 5 minutes, right? And then they're like, okay, I'm gonna go do something else, you know. But they got what they needed from dad, you know.
Yeah, our kids, Juliana is our youngest girl. She's 5. And it was funny the other day. So she's been working on addition, subtraction, etc. Right? And you know, she's got her little school stuff that she's working, but she's been asking me about it directly. And so she was asking about it, and I wasn't actually really paying attention. And I don't know if I was looking at a book or I was looking at a phone or whatever it was. We were just kind of sitting there, and she's like, I know you're not listening to me. I need you to answer my question. And I was like, okay, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we had a conversation about ice cream bars, and if you eat 2, you know, and you had 5 and you eat 2, how many ice cream bars do you have left? And she's like, well, 3. And I'm like, well, that's subtraction right there. Just 5 minus 2. She's like, okay, I got it. She was done, right? So
yeah.
30-second interaction on subtraction. But they know if you're not paying attention. You know, they'll call you on it in a second.
Yeah,
at least my kids will.
Oh yeah, mine do too. And I'll find myself, you know, they're trying to chat me about something, and I'm checking an email or whatever. And I don't know how many times they've actually like physically grabbed my phone and like put it away, you know. And it's like, you're right.
Got it.
Yeah. It's like, thank you for calling me out on that, 6-year-old. You know, so. Well, John. Well, I know you're busy. We'll wrap here in a minute, but I've got two questions for you. One I ask every guest that we have on, and I'll save that one for the next question. But if there's, you know, someone that's just tuning in, right, and they're a dad, they're struggling, you know, to want to connect with their kids, to find that presence and really instill value to their children, and just having a rough time, like, what would you know, have be one piece of advice for them? And we've talked about a lot, you know, during this conversation, but what would be one big takeaway from this, you know, a theme that you would want to leave with them?
You know, love, of course, is at the base of all of it, right? And so I think you kind of have to love God. I think you kind of have to, you know, I don't know if love yourself is the right word, but you have to respect yourself to be in a spot, I think, to give love to other people, right? And I just mean in terms of, if you don't have a love for God, and you don't respect yourself, then it's really hard to be in a spot, I think, where you can be constantly giving to others. So, you know, that would be one piece. But I think the number one thing, it really is, maybe not number one, but humility. I think humility is key. And what I mean by humility in this sense is besides kind of the vulnerability of it, it's just a willingness to say, I'm not perfect. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is not where I want to be. Yes, you're right to challenge me on this and to bring this out. But I still love you, and I'm still engaged, and I might owe you an apology, and I'm not going to be afraid to do that, right? And so, you know, we've had 1 or 2 of our kids, maybe more than that, but one I'm thinking of right now, who, you know, there was, you know, just would constantly pushing, right? And it would be, and at times it probably was one of those, I am the dad, you need to do as I say, you know, you're going to obey me, etc. And yeah, you need to expect obedience from children, particularly from younger children. At the same time, there are probably things that we would engage on, and he would get really upset at, you know, no, we're enforcing it this way, and I kind of, there's a Bible verse about, fathers don't provoke your children to anger, right? And it's like, well, what does that really mean? Have you really thought about that verse? And what, it certainly says children obey your parents, but it says fathers don't provoke your children to anger. I'm pretty sure it was fathers, right? I think it's one of the things they said, this is something that, dads are a little bit more inclined to. And part of what I've concluded it might mean, or at least what it means in my setting, is I may be technically right? This may be the technically best answer, but I can't always be the wise, I know all father, and I'm going to teach you this lesson. Sometimes I have to be like, I'm maybe pushing harder than you need to be pushed right now. I'm maybe doing something that that isn't right in my own life, right? Or in my own approach that's impacting you. And I need to have the humility to recognize that and to ask for your grace and your forgiveness, even if you're an 8-year-old, that you've got to do that. And that's humbling, right? Because particularly 12 kids, you almost always, any given day, you're going to do something with at least one or more of them where you're like, yeah, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. I should have been listening. I'm sorry. So, which is kind of why I go back to that. You got to kind of have, I think, that love for the Lord, and you need to have some grace and some respect for yourself, because if you don't, it can be traumatic. Like you're constantly apologizing and constantly realizing where you fall short. But you kind of got to be okay with that. You kind of got to recognize that you're loved as well, and that and respect yourself enough to say, yeah, I'm doing some good stuff. I'm not this horrible person, but I'm respected, I'm loved, I'm loving, and then you can approach your children with that humility that I think you need to.
Yeah, no, huge. I love that. So the other question, and I pose this to everyone that we have on, there is a technical, to use that term again, biological definition of what a father is, right? Like someone that bears children. But obviously from our conversation, it encompasses a lot more than that. To be a good father, be a good dad. So, almost everyone has the capability, outside of some cases to father a child. But what does it really mean to be a dad? And what would you say is the definition of a dad?
That's a really good question, actually. I guess I should have done some more research here.
I keep it hidden.
Yeah. I think there's probably a word in there that also has an A in it, sacrifice, right? Yeah. So I think being a dad is really having a willingness to sacrifice oneself for your children, for your spouse, for others, as a military person, for your country, right? It's making big sacrifices and small sacrifices, right? Of yourself to them, to the Lord, to the people around you, always being in that sacrificial sort of mindset. Doesn't mean you don't ever do some stuff for you.
Yeah.
But I think that's, when you see, you read stories from scripture, from really any of the great spiritual literature that's there from all the faiths, from just history, the noblest, thing that you see is when somebody sacrifices themselves, right? You kind of think of A Tale of Two Cities, and the main character there, who I don't believe had any children, right? But he switched himself with the man who I think had been his rival maybe at one point, but who did have, I believe, was married and maybe had a child. I can't quite remember the story well enough, other than he switched himself. He sacrificed himself, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's a far, far better thing that I've done now than I've ever done. It's a far, far better rest I go to than
Yeah.
I've ever known.
Mhm.
I would argue he was a dad to that family,
Yeah.
right? Even though biologically he
Yeah.
wasn't, right?
Mhm.
It was the essence of fatherhood, this sacrifice.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that answer. I had a guest on that talked about their definition of it. It was a lot of the same as the sacrifice, but it was really painted a clear picture of, there's I don't know if it's a famous drawing or what, but you've probably seen it on the internet, there's a dad, he's holding the hand of his daughter, and there's pieces missing from him, right, that help make the daughter whole. And it's not really about, you trying to like instill yourself and make them a version of you, but it's
That's
really
right.
about like taking the best parts of yourself to help them create their own future, and sacrificing that. So, John, thank you so much for coming on.
Yep, absolutely.
A great conversation. I don't know if you're on social media or if anybody wants to ask a question, of you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think I won't say I post a lot on social media, but I am on it. So it's just, there's not many John Fuchkos out there. So yeah, it's pretty easy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, we will see you on the next episode.